It is a real slippery slope, and I think we really need to do a huge, last stand for us as creators to fight this.
Hello and welcome to the Keyboard Chronicles, a podcast for keyboard players. I'm your host, David Holloway, and I'm pumped as always to be here with you. I'm really excited to bring you our interview with Peter Sandberg. Peter comes out of Sweden, the beautiful city of Uppsala. He runs a studio there and has had a hugely successful career to date as a composer and now performer and artist, very much in his own right. Peter, you will have actually potentially heard some of Peter's music. He's had music appear across a range of formats, including the iconic TV series Stranger Things. But there's lots more to Peter's story than that, as you'll hear. He has a new album coming out in May called Temporary Coexistence of Humans. I've listened to sort of the first 6 or 7 pieces from that. It is absolutely incredible. I am majorly a converted fan, and I'm about to pull the trigger on the vinyl record. That's how keen I am. We're going to talk to Peter about a range of stuff, including the incredible deep thought he puts into the composition of his albums and the concepts behind the albums, and they are very robust, really well thought out concepts. We're also going to get a little bit into the weeds as far as technique and signal chains in the studio and stuff. So if you're like me and you're a bit of a gear nerd, there's a little bit of that to enjoy in there as well. I think there's a lot to enjoy. So I'll let you have a listen to Peter and I'll talk to you at the end of the show. Peter, it's an absolute pleasure and honour to have you on the show, sir. How are you this fine Friday morning in lovely Sweden?
Hey, David. Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's a wonderful day today. The sun is shining and spring has finally arrived and everybody's happy. So that's good.
And look, I'm very happy to be talking to you. So I'm very much looking forward to delving into your career. I thought we would kick off in a fairly traditional way, and that's just asking about your past year and upcoming 6 months or so. I know you have a new album coming out. I would love to hear about that, but just tell us about the past year for Peter Sandberg and what you've been up to and what's coming up.
Yeah, so basically I've spent this past year just finding the right home for me and reevaluating my business basically and my artistry and trying to find my where to go and so on for the future. I think I've really got into a place where I have a wonderful team around me and I have this new album on the horizon that's gonna be really great to get out there and see how people actually respond to it and so on. So yeah, these past couple of months, half year, I've been just hard at work finalizing the album and so on. And yeah, I'm going into I think it's 5 weeks away now from album launch, so I'm really excited about that.
So yes, for those unaware, on May the 1st, Peter's album Temporary Coexistence of Humans was released. And so I'm really keen, firstly, Peter, to talk about what was the recording process for you with this one? How did it vary from the numerous previous albums you've recorded, and what was the particular inspiration for this album?
I think the most important thing with this album was that this is a new era of Peter Sandberg, basically. And I used to think, since I'm coming from this previous album, which was a little bit more introspective and quite dense in its flavors. So I feel like taking a step back and then reevaluating where I'm at and so on, and just realizing that I might just go back to the piano and make a proper piano album, and because that is what my core is all about, and I love composing on the piano, and that is what I do best. So yeah, I decided fairly early on that I need to do that, and then this I've been walking around with this and trying to establish this concept of mine quite for quite some time now, and it's been this idea of temporary coexistence of humans, and how, especially when out traveling or in transit between places, you are aligned with a complete stranger's fate and life path. And it's mind-boggling to me when you're seated beside a stranger on the underground in London, for instance, and then you end up saying a couple of like sentences to each other and like, oh, nice to meet you. That rarely happens anyway, but sometimes it do. And those moments are so beautiful. And I feel like there's not been a lot of times where I've regretted saying something in those situations. So I feel like just having this idea and encouraging people to stop what they're doing and just look up and see the world around them and appreciate it. And just, the beauty lies in the mundane. And I think that's the core of the album, basically.
And am I correct, Peter, in that I know there's sort of an EP format called Monday at the moment, which has the songs Momentary, Intrusive Thoughts, and so on. Is that part of the new album or a sort of a bridge to the new album?
Yeah, so basically there's been singles released before Christmas, and I think we just chose to release a bunch of singles, basically. So I think there's 7 of them or something, just to get the ball rolling again. And it feels like I've been away for a while, so I need to do a proper appearance and say, ta-da, look, Peter is back. So that's basically what we're trying to do. So there's still 1 single to come, and then the album will be launched 1st of May. So yeah.
And before we jump into the songs, I just wanted to make a comment to having listened to those singles a number of times now. I just love the framing from a graphical viewpoint even. I mean, a lot of musicians are also visual people, and I just love what was the story behind some of the amazing, what I would call office or factory shots that are underpinning a lot of the stuff. It's just beautiful imagery.
Yeah, so that was a really important thing for me with the visuals, and I had my creative director David Kitson on board fairly quickly in this process, and we had these brainstorming meetings on Zoom where we just discussed different options and how we could achieve this story in the visuals as well. So we came up with the idea of building this world where you have a waiting room, and it's unclear what the waiting room really is, and you follow 3 separate characters and myself into the room, and their emotions are reflected through the music, and it really elevates the music as well, I think. And the actors were lovely, and we had a wonderful day of shooting in London. And I think just the aesthetics of that, we try to achieve those almost like dental office waiting room, but with a bit more, it should be a little bit more delicate and like more, not delicate, but more like more beautiful.
Yeah.
And nice. So I think we really achieved that, and we had a great team on that day. And also I've been thinking about what this waiting room, because we left that fairly open, and I also want to do that, leave that open to the listener to figure out themselves what the waiting room actually is. That could be a number of things, and I was thinking about this on a flight the other week, and I wrote down some ideas around it, and I feel like I want some answers. What is it about? And I just figured out that maybe it's just about the idea that you have so much going on all the time, and you are so focused on the next thing, and you are constantly waiting for the next promotion or the next the week to end so you can go on your beloved holiday or the concert in a few months' time. And there's always this will to move on. And I feel like this waiting brew really encapsulates that thought. And all of us humans are waiting for something. But there is a danger in always waiting for something, because that time waiting is not something that you will get back.
That's right.
And when you see your number and your number is called out and you are walking up, and what if that is the end and you've wasted your life basically chasing the next thing and not being present? So that's sort of what my interpretation is.
I love it. And as you know, Peter, a lot of us get to particular ages or experience certain life events that make you realize how important it is to stop and wait and appreciate what you have. Was there a particular juncture that this has become a powerful issue for you? Obviously, without getting too personal, but just broadly, is it just something that occurred to you suddenly, or just it's life experience?
I think this is. I really like building my concepts through. It's like building blocks, and I also talk about my creative process like this, building Lego, basically. When I reach the point where I like an idea and a concept, I try to elevate that and maybe first condense it down and then add different ideas to it that could fit. And then I have this big structure that is quite dense if you're willing to explore it. But it could also be just a lovely piece of music. But then you, as a listener, see this is lovely, and then you see it's called routine or temporary coexistence of humans, and then you realize this is interesting, and then you see that I've written a little bit of those small poems or texts that describes different observations that I've done throughout this journey. So each track of the album has its own story that I've written down. And then you can just, and then you have the music video, and it's like this world that's really unfolding in front of you. And I just love that. And I love that when I'm looking at other contemporaries as well, and when they do the same, it's just so lovely.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And so, last question on the album, Peter, and that's just your approach to the composition. You said you wanted to return to sort of composing and sitting behind the piano. Is that literally what you did for this album? Did you have some sketched out ideas already musically, or what was your approach?
Well, my approach to the writing of the album is, well, my safe haven or my safe place is always by the piano. And that's usually where I do my where I start my creative journeys. Maybe not if it's a film score, then I'm on the computer. But for my own project, for my albums, I usually start at the piano, finding different emotions and those small musical seeds that can really take root and become something bigger. So I usually start putting up some microphones just in case, because I am really easily distracted, as I've mentioned a lot before in interviews. And ADHD is a wonderful thing, but it's also a terrible curse sometimes. But I'm just recording mostly all time, and then I start to improvise, and I'm searching for different things, and maybe I start doing general practice and just working on techniques and scales and those classical things. And then I stumble upon a melody or a figure that I'm intrigued by, and then I go more deeply into it, and I discover, maybe this will fit with that thing, and maybe this thing will fit with this thing that I recorded yesterday. And then I bring that up and I find that. And again, it's building blocks. So usually I just do these sort of sessions where I sit for hours and just play. And then I do the slightly boring bit of listening through everything, and then I mark everything or find those moments of where the stars aligned, and save those, and then I can just start building my world, basically.
Great. No, thank you. I mean, for those, I said, when the album is released, I can't emphasize enough how great these pieces are. And I know, Peter, you've got some fame around how intimate the piano tone is. I mean, it really, I listened with headphones, just how beautifully intimate and the piano tone is across those singles you've released. So that's probably a good segue just more widely into your technique. How do you actually achieve sort of that delicate close mic sound that appears on so much of your music? So as far as both the actual piano itself, how you prepare the piano, but your actual technique as a player.
Yeah, it is interesting thing. I'm always keen of developing my sound throughout every album and trying, even though one of my earlier albums called Motion, I really had this wonderful piano sound, and it's actually the same piano that I recorded this album on. But it's interesting to compare them because they are different, although similar. But I usually just, for this album, I had two microphones from Pearl, a Swedish company, and they had this weird capsule with this rectangular and elongated, so it captures a more wide image rather than a traditional condenser. I also had a couple of room mics like against the walls on each side and tried to capture this space of mine as well. Because that's also something I've been afraid of using too much room sounds, because it might disturb this really intimate. And I've been a big believer of like smacking those microphones in the like the closest that you can come to the piano strings. But then I realized that that's not my favorite sound. My favorite sound is you back off a bit and maybe half a meter off piano and not too wide, and then you get that wonderful balance. And speaking of how I treat the piano, my piano is also a Yamaha Youth. It's the flagship of Yamaha's uprights, and it has this wonderful mechanics and the piano function. It's really easy to play and so on. And then I use, as all of my contemporaries now, use felt in between the clubs and the strings to get that really intimate and wonderful sound. I started this album saying I need to go away from that. I'm gonna go with a traditional piano sound, and I had my piano technician come in here, and he did the intonation of the hammers and really soften them up. And I was like, no, you need to go even further to like dampen it down a bit, because compared to when you are in front of an audience, the piano really need to what's the word when it needs to project? Yeah, it needs to project out into the audience. And well, in a studio scenario, the audience is this close to the piano, and then you need to treat the piano in that way as well. Soft intonation really makes sense in a studio environment. So I try to intonate it as low as possible, but he's like, oh, this is sacrilegious because you can't do that because you're going to ruin this beautiful instrument. And I'm the boss. And we had this argument forth and back, and he's amazing. Ingemar, he's my go-to piano tech, but he understands what I'm getting at, and he understands the process. And although reluctant, he's like, okay, let's do it. So now it has a wonderful warm sound without the felt as well, but it still is fairly, well, it's difficult because when you start with the felt, you can go back. It's like I've compared this. I have 3 kids, so it's those, like, the security blankets. It's the piano player's security blanket, and it's really tough trying to get unused of it or take it away because it's not safe. And it's funny, but it's so true. And yeah, I'm still trying to develop the sound and trying to go back to those like wonderful piano tones where you have it has those wonderful overtones, but in this album it didn't fit. So I just went back to my felted piano and used that, and it ended up really lovely and delicate. So
it certainly did. Yeah, look, it sounds amazing. And I mean, obviously, Peter, you work out of your studio there in Uppsala, and you're sort of known for blending those piano sounds with analog synths, tape machines, effects, and so on. So can you walk us through, once you've got those core piano pieces, what your current broader keyboard rig is and how you actually, your signal chain and how you get sort of closer to that final sound you're looking for?
Yeah. So from those pedal microphones, the closest to piano, I went through some Neves in my 500 rack here. I have a couple of 511s from Rubit Neve Designs, and they are really transparent and color the sound too much. Since it's so heavy already, I think it needs to have those that air. And then for the room mics, I think I went through the RPQs from AA, and then through I have a Apollo that's been acting up lately, so it's funny. But I had a solution for it now, so that's good. But it's go through there and then into Pro Tools, and Pro Tools is where I do my last stand, and it is, and I tend to treat it a little bit, but fairly simple. I am very cautious about not overdoing things, but then, yeah, other times I might just do that or do things. But for this album, I recorded all the tracks first, and for some of them, I used a little bit of these outboard effects. Just random guitar pedals I use. For this particular one, I got this pedal called Console from Hologram Electronics, and I used that to just create different textures in the background. And some of the more the darker tracks I recorded it live when I was playing, and other tracks I just added a little bit of sparkle on top in the mix process. So yeah, it's really, really simple, this album.
So essentially what you're saying, Peter, is the vast majority of the sounds is the piano routed through the pedals and effects, and there was essentially not a lot else added there.
Yeah, exactly. That's how it was.
Mate, yeah. And I know, does that change how you play the instrument again when you're routing something like a piano through sort of something that a heavy spatial effect or a pedal? Does that actually change the way you're playing at a finger level?
Yeah, of course. That is hugely impactful. And also that's why I'm so intrigued by it. And I used it on my live rig. I have a pedal board where I can sample and I can start looping and so on. And it's so fascinating of just being like, because as a piano player, you must know this yourself. I've always been so jealous of guitarists because they have this, well, they are so darn cool and they can jump around on stage and be like these rock stars where the keyboards are just stuck with their pianos or synth rigs, and we can like do a little bit of shoulder work or something, but that's sort of it. There's no like jumping around, and I'm so jealous about that. But again, my music would not maybe be suitable for that behavior on stage. But with that said, I think just adding guitar pedals and outboard effects to the piano really elevates it. And I started doing this on my Motion album, and with the title track Motion, which has become this wonderful phenomenon right now. I feel like that was the first time I realized that, oh, this is so cool. This is gonna be my sound. And that was a interesting process as well, because used this. It was such a shitty effect pedal. It was so cheap, and it had this sample and hold function that I used accidentally hit when I was playing around, and then I was like, oh wait, this is nice. And then it looped, and then you can just throw other effects on it. And all of a sudden, I've improvised the motion track, and it was such a cool experience. So that really triggers my inspiration, and I completed the album after that. So
Yeah.
it was really cool.
And the motion album is amazing. And I mean, you just mentioned about the song itself, taking on a life of its own, as has the song Deep. Just tell us about the process of how those two songs, I obviously am aware of why they took off, but just tell us a little bit about what was the process where they gained the attention and the life that they did, and what impact that's had on you as far as you as a player or your career more broadly.
Yeah, I think the Motion album was, in general, just the first time where I really embarked on this artist journey, and that was my first proper album as an artist. The other releases I've done was just things that I've done, bespoke things, and it was just collection of works that I've done throughout the years, and but it didn't have this cohesive theme, and it was not meant to be played from start to finish. And it was so inspiring just to go into that process and create a body of work that was one. The Motion was a stepping board into that whole process. And for the Deep track, I think that was fairly. I started with a huge synth patch, and it had this wonderful feel to it. It's so simple. It's just 4 chords through the whole thing, but it really transforms and you into another world. And it was so lovely having that featured on Stranger Things as well. Speaking about elevation, it just felt like the music was perfect. And I heard later on from the music supervisor that that was the case. They actually cut the scene to the music. And then they reached out to me like, we really need this approval now, because we're gonna. Yeah. So it was such a wonderful experience.
And that's a really interesting point, Peter, because the vast majority of our listeners and viewers are musicians themselves. A lot of them will have music up for licensing and sync work and so on. It seems to me that there was an awareness by either the music supervisor or someone on the set that already loved this music. What was the actual process of they approached you for approval? What was the sort of process there?
Yeah, so apparently the music supervisor was a fan of mine, and it's just mind-boggling that these wonderful persons are listening to my music when they have so much music sent to them all the time that they use their spare time listening to my music. And it's really, it's an honor. But I got this. It's a funny story, actually. So it was late, and I was I was lying in bed and scrolling through the last bits on Instagram or whatnot, and I was like, oh, enough. And then I was like, oh, maybe I should just check my email once before I put it away. And then I saw this like Stranger Things sync request, and I was like, wait a minute. Immediately sat up and be like, oh no, what's happening? And then apparently they've tried to reach me for a couple of weeks, but they misspelled to one of my team members. They misspelled the .com or something. So they didn't receive the request. So they reached out to me personally to ask for it. And I was like, oh my God, what's happening? And called everybody up, and like, I was a little bit stressed out, but we got it in the end. So, but it was a close one. But it was such it was a huge milestone for me. for sure.
Yes. And I know you've done other work for TV and advertising and so on. So you'd done previous work in this area before that request came through?
Yeah. I mean, not that much actually. I've done before starting out with my artistry. I did a lot of work for different music libraries and did that kind of work, and I did so much music and really was able to learn the craft of recording, and I did all the mistakes you can do and tried different things, and I realized that no, I'm not Hans Zimmer, and no, I'm not this jazz guy, even though I did a lot of jazz for some reason. And then I settled on this where I am right now with my piano in focus and all that. But with the whole syncs and all of that, it mainly comes from that part of my journey where I did a bunch of work and then added that to a library where it then could be placed on different things and so on.
And are you even seeing, I mean, as a well-established artist in your own right now, so you hopefully are not relying on that as much, but I mean, are you seeing through colleagues or just in the industry the impact of AI on that aspect of music? Because I would have guessed it's partly decimated that side of the industry.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm terrified about all that development within the AI world. It is a real slippery slope, and I think we really need to do a huge, last stand for us as creators to fight this, because AI is wonderful and it's gonna come for us all eventually, but we need to find a framework where there's laws and so on to protect us as creatives, because I think there is something in our nature and human nature that we really want something human. And if you just get a bunch of decent music thrown at you all the time, but you don't know who it is, then it will be really, I think people will lack that and will be missing that, and they will start to search for other options and how they can. But just to bring it back to my album, I think this whole album is also speaking about AI. I think this is also about stepping back and pause and just I've done these temporary visits where I choose to go to people and be invited to people's home and play on their upright pianos in their living rooms. And it's been such a wonderful experience. And to be able to play in front of someone that sits 1 meter away from you it's nothing that AI could accomplish. And I think I'm so keen of, I'm like, it's like a counterforce that the more progress that makes, the more I want to lean back to those roots and the most fundamental way of performing music in front of people. Also going back to I have this, a typewriter just back here and these analog things is to make things more and more physical and real, and I have this shitty cassette player that I use and create textures on, and I've started soldering out in the other room here and creating different effects that I can use in my music and so on, and everything is hands on, and it's like this counterforce it's become really important for me.
That's brilliant and extremely well put. And you've provided a brilliant segue. So speaking of typewriters and a long time ago, although you are younger than me for sure, but let's talk a little bit about your musical upbringing. So what got you into music in the first place? What was your training, if any, sort of those early years, Peter? I'm very interested a little bit more on that.
Yeah, my parents, they are both musical, and they got together, they met during college in Sweden, music college. And they got us and we were always encouraged to play music, and they played music in the house all the time, and they were a part of, we went to church and there was a lot of music going on there. And there was this one Christmas, I remember, that I sat down because I had my issues growing up and being really unsettled and really like all over the place. I couldn't sit still for obvious reasons. But then when I was 12, I sat down at the piano one Christmas and I was really intrigued. And my father, he saw that and he was like, oh, this is my only chance to make this happen. And he rushed in and showed me how to play this very interesting version of Jingle Bells, but in a boogie version. And it was, I taught myself that really quickly, and then I looped that and sat for hours until everybody's ear was numb and they hated me for it. But then that was the pivotal moment where I realized, oh, wait, this is what I'm supposed to do. And then I really went for it, and I got myself a wonderful, very strict teacher from Czech Republic, and he had like this Russian school of teaching in his baggage. So he was really tough and really like reluctant of giving praise, which really bothered me because I really want to have that acknowledgement that, oh, you're doing well. But I never got that. So I became even more eager to show him. I was like, I'll show you. And then I went back and I spent so much time, so many hours in the practice chair, and I sat there and tried and tried and tried. And then eventually he said, oh, this wasn't that bad. And I was like, oh my God, this is the moment I've been waiting for. And then next week, everything was the same again. But he really got me in shape, and because I was struggling with the sheet music, and it was really difficult for me to start with the classical pieces because I've learned by ear, and that's yeah. So it was really I was like my Achilles heel going into the more like advanced pieces and so on, that I had a hard time getting into the music. But when I really had the music, when I've learned it, it was beautiful, and I really I really excelled at it. And eventually I applied for the Royal College here in Stockholm, and I played for these lovely professors. And when it was time to do those exams, I was applying for the college. So I did the exam, or yeah, I don't know what you call it, the audition. Yeah, I did audition for the college, and I came in on second reserve, and the first reserve got in. And that's also a moment that terrifies me still, but because what if I've gotten in? And that's like the craziest ever. And I still get chills from that moment, because if I would have gotten in there, I would have become this whole other creature, basically. So I ended up I got in a different city, and it was a chamber music focused. So I did that for 2 years, and then during those 2 years, I got less and less inspired by this whole world, and I just felt like I was not good enough, and it was really taking a toll on my mental health, and I was just devastated after a while. And I was like, no, I can't do this anymore. I'll stop this now, and I'll find something else. And then for no particular reason, there was this other pivotal moment where I went on, or also speak about temporary coexistence, because I stepped on to this bus going into town, and I saw this acquaintance of mine that's also a musician, my brother's friend, and I stepped on and I just sat down beside him, and we started talking, and he was like, oh, so I've just started composing for this music library, and it's great. It's real fun. They need so much music, and why you should do it. And I was like, oh, wow. So that was the first moment I realized maybe a composer or producer, that could be interesting. And then I started that, and that was the start of where I am right now. So it's it's so mind-boggling,
It
those
is.
moments in time where those crossroads. It's yeah,
Yeah, no, it is.
ridiculous.
It absolutely is mind blowing. And so I do, just being aware of time, I do want to move quickly to some of your live stuff. I know you're doing some dates later this year. Just tell us a little bit how you approach reproducing your amazing music in a live environment. So how do you actually do that? So how do you handle all those keyboard duties live? Are you running particular systems? Just fascinated by that aspect.
Yeah, so when playing live before, I've had this quite complex rig where I have a Apollo a sound card in a travel rack, and so I'm running all the piano sounds through that, and then I can send to different effects that I have, my pedals and Ableton and so on, and then I route that all out through the Apollo in out to the PA, and it's been it's been really interesting, and it works fairly well, but it's a little bit cumbersome setting up and being like, and people don't understand it really. So I think for this album, again, like condensing down things, and so for this tour, it's gonna be piano, and then I'm working on. I call it my Frankenstein piano, and it's still not done yet, so it's kind of a secret. So don't tell anyone. No, I'm kidding. So basically, I'm trying to condense down all this that I've established until this day, but condense that down so I can have an acoustic version of it without all those complicated computers and routings and all of that. So I really want an engulfing experience for the listeners, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about these different observations with the album that I've done and really go back to the basics. And I have a bit of effects that I can run through a tiny speaker or amp, and I'm building a own amp as well, and effects that I
Wow.
can add to the piano and so on. There's a lot of things in the making right now that I'm really inspired about, and will also feed into the next journey, the next concept or so on. So it's really intriguing how things are
Yeah.
right now.
No, it
So
certainly
yeah.
sounds like a highly creative time. And speaking of being creative, there are times when you may not feel as creative. One of the sort of last questions I wanted to ask you, last couple, was when you're sitting at the piano and nothing's inspiring you, what do you tend to do to get yourself inspired? Do you walk away? Do you just try something unusual on the piano? What do you do to sort of get motivated?
Yeah, that's a real issue sometimes, trying to find that inspiration, because it feels like it's this really mystical creature almost. Like creativity is something that you need uh, to into and be. Yeah, it's so weird. It's almost like spiritual, and yeah, you could sit for hours talking about creativity, but I think because we were talking off camera a little bit about inspiration and favorite music albums and so on. And although I really love music, obviously, because I spend all my time doing it, I'm terrible at listening to music. So because a lot of people listen to music to get inspired to create, but I'm terrified of listening to music because I don't want to rip them off. I don't want to copy paste it unconsciously. So I'm trying to find my inspirations elsewhere. So if I'm stuck, I go out for a run and listen to interesting concepts in different podcasts, or I find other beautiful things to do that inspires me, like sourdough or brewing beers, or I don't know. There's so many things that can inspire creativity without it being in the realm of music. So yeah, I think that's sort of my go-to. But just to mention and connect it to the album, I think another thing that I really like doing to create and be creative within the arts is photography. And I really love street photography and finding stories around people and strangers. So it's funny, I'll end on that story. But last week I went to London for a bunch of meetings and I was doing a couple of visits and played, and I had Thursday afternoon off, and I was a little bit bummed out about it, but I was like, I'm here, I should work. But yeah, anyway, I'll spend the afternoon doing nothing, and then I'll go back to Sweden. But then I realized that I could just go around and spend my time photographing and doing street work, and I found these wonderful persons and humans that really I was like bubbling afterwards because I was so inspired by these connections that I made. Because often you don't want to be noticed when taking sneaky photos of people, but when they notice, you need to make contact and say, "Oh, apologies, I used to do this for street photography, and I'm not a weirdo. Please apologize. Please, please, I apologize." Often they are super nice about it and they are just interested in what I'm doing. But then I arrived at this wonderful, huge staircase in central London, and the sun was, it was like the first proper day of spring, and the sun was shining, but it was really cold in the air, and the wind was blowing. And I arrived at this place and I saw there was so many people just rushing around and really eager to get to where they were going. But then in the midst of everything, I saw this elderly man sitting in the perfect spot to embrace those sun rays. And it was against the wall, and it was secured from all the wind, and it was so he was like without any phone or any distractions. He was just sitting there, closing his eyes and just embracing the sun. And I was like, oh, this is the photo I need to take. And then I tried desperately to find the right composition and so on. And then I came closer and closer, and then he realized that I was taking photos, and I was like, oh, hey, I'm Peter. And apparently he was this highly educated linguistic professor or something from Algeria. And I ended up sitting beside him for half an hour and talking and listening to his wise words. And I was so inspired afterwards, and I was like calling my wife and saying, "Do you know what I just did?" And she was like, "Wow, that's amazing." And yeah, I mean, speaking about being inspired, that is exactly what inspires me.
Exactly. That is an amazing.
Things.
That is an amazing story. Thank you for sharing. That is incredible. And so you mentioned about, not listening to music, and we are going to wrap up with what would traditionally we'd call our desert island disc question. But I'm wondering if we take a slightly different approach, Peter, and that's, you mentioned linguistics, you mentioned you like listening to podcasts, and I assume you read. Are there 5 books that inspire you outside of music?
Yeah, I mean, I so eagerly want to be that guy who reads and sit on the bus and have that thick book in his hand and be like, oh, look at me, I'm so interesting. But I'm terrible at reading because I don't have the peace in my body to do that. But I've tried, and really, because I feel so inspired by it. But there is this book. It might come as a surprise, but I think there is a book in Swedish called, I'm not sure what it's actually called, but it's about happiness. And I've just started reading it, and it's a professor here in Sweden who talks about happiness. And how it affects us as humans, and why we are always on the pursuit of it, and why it's so elusive, because you can't have true happiness for longer than 6 months or so. And it's such a easy book to read because, well, he tried to make life happy. It's really, really cleverly put together. So even a struggling reader as me can do it. But he talks about acknowledging those small moments of happiness instead of chasing that huge reward of happiness. And also when something nice is happening, if you sit at the dinner table with your kids and everybody's laughing and you're having a wonderful discussion about nothing, like the most ridiculous thing, and then just saying it out loud, oh, this is a moment of happiness. That really, I feel like that's really something that's transformed my way of being. Yeah, I really love that.
That's amazing. And look, I mean, I'd have to say, Peter, you mentioned the elderly gentleman, the Algerian linguistics professor, feeling sheltered from the wind and enjoying the sun. I feel that's exactly what your music does for a lot of people. Certainly from my listening, it's, and I'm not saying that as far as it's all, light music. It is far from it, but it is an incredibly substantive, uplifting, inspirational suite of work you've done, and I cannot wait to see what the future brings as well. And I can't thank you enough for taking the time telling us about part of it.
Thank you, David. Yeah, it's so kind of you. I really appreciate everything that people do to help me on this journey as well. And I'm feeling very lucky that I've arrived at this point in life. And
amazing.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
And there we have it. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Peter. I know I certainly did. What a deep thinker of a musician and composer Peter is. As I mentioned in the intro, I'm loving every piece of music I've listened to, and I'm going to be listening to lots more of it. Do check out the new album. It is available. You can check out Peter's work. He has his own website. We'll link to that. And also he's on all the streaming services. So yeah, do take the time. You will not be sorry. So a massive thanks to Peter for his time. A massive thanks to all of you out there for your time, and in particular thanks to our gold and silver supporters. I'll start off this episode with our newest supporter, which is Mr. Paul Heaton, who some of you may know. He has his own YouTube channel and he does some amazing, hate using these terms, but new age / ambient relaxation meditation music. He's known as the Dreamscapist. Paul's music itself is incredible. And a big thanks to Paul for his support of the podcast. Do check out Dreamscapist on YouTube. I think he's definitely also on, I think it's Bandcamp and so on, and we'll provide links to that over time as well. So big thanks to Paul, and then also our other amazing ongoing supporters, the lovely Tammy Catcher from Tammy's Musical Stew. Thank you as always, Tammy. Dewey Evans from the sunny land of Wales, thank you, sir, as always, and for your thoughtful comments on each of the videos as we release them, and same for you, Tammy. It's always appreciated. The brilliant Mike Wilcox at midnightmastering.com. If you are creating your own music and you want a great job done on mixing and mastering, Mike is the guy. And last but not least, the musicplayer.com forums. Dave Bryce and the team at the Keyboard Corner in particular, still going strong, still lots of great discussions. We've been having some great discussions there on the forums recently about everything from AI and music to what would have happened if the Beatles had continued, if John Lennon hadn't died and George Harrison hadn't died. Lots of interesting stuff. So do check out musicplay.com forums if you'd like to get involved. Again, a big thank you to you. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. And until then, keep on playing.